Tech Forward program. Whether you're new or returning, we're pleased to have you with us today. At the Chamber Foundation, our mission is to help educate the public about how business does well, does good, and prepares for the future. So this series falls under that last bit, preparing for the future. How can you help future-proof your organization? We've created this interactive series to help explore just that. So whether you are a small business or a large business, and no matter what industry you're in, you've probably noticed that the pace of innovation is truly moving at lightning speed. You might find yourself thinking, what do these new tech advances mean for me, for my business, for my stakeholders? And how do I ensure that I'm part of the wave instead of being wiped out by it? So each episode, as part of Tech Forward, we will bring experts to share their insights and expertise about the technologies and trends that are shaping the work that we're doing now and in the future. Today's topic is blockchain. We are breaking down the blockchain with Jerry Cuomo, Vice President of Blockchain Technologies at IBM. And not only is Jerry an expert in blockchain, he has literally written the book on it. He's got a new book called Think Blockchain, and he's teaching a course this semester as well. So we are excited to have him as our techspert today. We also hope you'll help us ask the right questions as we go along. So be sure to enter yours into the chat, and we'll cover as many as we can at the end of the program. Again, thanks for joining us. Let's get started. Hi, Jerry. Pleased to have you with us today.
Hey, Hilary. Oh, it's great to be here. I'm very excited.
Excellent. So want to start with Blockchain 101. Tell us, how do you define blockchain?
So, Hilary, great question. I think everyone, when you think of blockchain, I think most people out there, you're probably saying, okay, this has something to do with Bitcoin. And you're not wrong. And certainly blockchain technology is used in Bitcoin. But I'm here to say that I think blockchain is much more, right? So you're limiting your perspective as businesses if you just pin blockchain to Bitcoin. It's a technology that I believe, and many of us believe, can form a platform for trustworthy computing and really propel the internet to its next level, right? So blockchain is certainly part of Bitcoin, or it's used in Bitcoin. But if there are 1,000 applications for blockchain, cryptocurrency and Bitcoin is just one. So we like to also talk about the other 999. So I guess, the question I get often is, so what's your definition of blockchain? And with that, if it's not Bitcoin, then can you give me an example? So I tell this little story, Hilary, and if it's okay, I'm going to go through it. It's a little bit of a cartoon here. And it's the blockchain duck story. I start this off by saying, trying to find a frame of reference. I think many of you, your businesses, somewhere behind your virtual firewall, there is a database. And so I think as a frame of reference, you wouldn't be wrong to think of blockchain as a type of database. but you wouldn't be 100% right either. So I like to say if databases were birds, then blockchain would be a duck. And that's just simply to give an analogy to say that you wouldn't be wrong to think of a good starting frame of mind to think of defining blockchain would be to think of it as a database of sorts, and then look at how it would be different. So there's different types of databases. There's SQL databases, there's NoSQL databases, and then there's this odd duck that we call a blockchain. So let's kind of look at the properties that this duck has and maybe compare those properties to a database. So unlike a database, and I think, Hilary, we all kind of know that there's this notion of a DBA or a database administrator who sets the rules for the ledger, for how that database works within that company. Blockchains are different. Blockchains have multiple administrators that each have a copy of the database. And this is a notion of a shared ledger. Right? So where a database could be pinned to a central organization or a central set of administrators, a database would be that, but a blockchain is shared, right? It's decentralized. So that's one important characteristic of a blockchain duck. The other thing is consensus. So unlike a database where when a transaction is submitted to that database, if it fits the rules that that single administrator set up, it's immediately committed to the ledger. Blockchains are a little different. When a blockchain is submitted, a transaction submitted to a blockchain, transactions are first proposed to the administrators. They consent on it using a consensus process, the whole group, and only then is the transaction considered to be good, right? So it's shared, and there's a group process to decide versus one. Next is the blowtorch, immutability. So unlike a database where the administrator can change records in the ledger, they have access to commands, database commands like update this record in the database or delete this record in a database. Hilary, this is not so in a blockchain. You see, once the group consents that this is a valid transaction, the blockchain is append only. So you can only write to a blockchain. You cannot delete, you cannot update records. And when that block is ready to be committed, it is cryptographically secured with other blocks in the ledger. This is this notion of a block forming a chain. This immutability is a really big deal because it creates what you would call an audit log. You can go back in time and look at the provenance of data, where it came from, what was the origin, and have pretty good trust that this hasn't been tampered with, right? And this starts to get into being the foundation of trustworthy computing. And there's more. If I can keep going. In fact, I haven't been, my mouse hasn't been clicking along. There's the consensus voting, and there's the blowtorch. You must have been saying, what do you mean by a blowtorch? There you go. Sorry about that. All right, and then last but not least, there is blockchains really differ with this notion of cryptography. So I mentioned the blocks are cryptographically linked. The Greek word kryptos means hidden, and a blockchain duck is an expert at using mathematical techniques to hide or scramble data. So while a database duck knows how to encrypt data from time to time, a blockchain duck lives by it, right? So the whole blockchain network is a set of encrypted data points or blocks that are hashed together. So to a blockchain duck, cryptography is just like swimming. It comes second nature, right? So again, you wouldn't be wrong to think about blockchain as a database. But as you can see, with being a shared ledger, that you kind of like you have that kind of jury effect going where you don't have a single judge, but you have a jury that is now looking over to see if it's fair or not. You have this notion of consensus where you can think about it on voting. Is this transaction right? Again, harder to game the system. Then we have immutability. Once this is committed, there is no administrators that can update or delete. It is kind of cryptographically signed, and then heavy cryptography throughout this whole process, you get this quote unquote database that really forms a new style of business, a business where trustworthy computing, and it's not like I don't trust my neighbor. Doesn't mean that your neighbor has to be mean. Your neighbor could be sloppy or irresponsible. Maybe they don't have the same level of IT budget that you have and can't afford to keep their computers. But with a blockchain in this community that is creating this shared ledger, you get fairness, you get, kind of repeatability, trustworthiness. I'll end on this thought that, as I said, there's not just one blockchain. So when someone says, I'm going to put this data on the blockchain, there is no the blockchain. So, and not all of them behave similarly. There's Bitcoin, there's Ethereum, there's Ripple, there's other technologies, one that I've been involved with creating called Hyperledger. So there are different ways to use blockchain for different applications. And as I said, you wouldn't be wrong to associate blockchain with Bitcoin because it is certainly one use, but you'd be missing out on the other 999 uses. Things like food safety, trusted identity. Imagine never having to remember a user ID or password again, that you have one identity for everyone on the internet. And I know I've been using the internet for over 30 years, and I calculated I've created almost 2,000 user IDs and passwords. I probably forgot 90% of those. But the dark web hasn't, I'm reminded sometimes that the dark web hasn't forgotten some of those. So wouldn't it be cool using blockchain that instead of me going to companies and sharing my identity, they come to me and I grant them access to my identity. Hence, I only have one user ID and password for the whole internet, right? So these are things that we're looking at with blockchain to really change how companies deal with governments, how companies deal with companies, and how individuals deal with all of those. So I'm not sure if this was very helpful, Hilary, but that's the blockchain duck story, and I'm sticking
No,
to
it
it.
was definitely helpful. My understanding of blockchain has significantly increased in the last 10 minutes, so thank you. I guess building a little bit on the point about cryptography and sort of automatically encrypting data all the time, can you just dive into that a little bit more? What does that mean for the security of data across blockchain versus other types of databases, right? And in a time where we are, more security conscious, we worry about cybersecurity, attacks and threats across different types of systems. Could you dive into that a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, blockchain has made cryptography, not optional, and I think in many cases it's optional. So sometimes we get lazy, but blockchain, it's not optional. It's just built right into the system, and so I think you kind of get that for free when you're working on a blockchain. So that's good, and that kind of mitigates maybe 50% of the issues. But partnering with blockchain, there are some amazing cryptography technologies that are there that are kind of like magic, in my opinion. Like when you sit back and look at it, there's one that piece of type of cryptography that I talk about in the book called zero knowledge proof. And if you're a fan of Where's Waldo, a favorite way to explain what zero knowledge proof is through a Where's Waldo example. But think about your child going into a bar and having to prove their age. Your government issued identity is not encrypted, right? It's a driver's license, most likely. Imagine you could, and of course I give, my age is on the driver's license. My child's age is on the driver's license. I don't think I get carded every once in a while. I think it's quite humorous. But anyway, but you see your age, but the bar worker also sees your address. And I'm not sure that I want the bar worker seeing my daughter's address, so to speak. So from a safety and cryptography, think about all that. Imagine a world, and this world is here, we just have to apply it as business, with zero knowledge proof, that my driver's license is always encrypted and never decrypted. You say, wait, never decrypted? Then how am I going to get information from it? Well, with zero knowledge proof, you can levy assertions against it. So you can say, is this person old enough to enter this establishment in New York? right? And it would come back yes or no. It won't say what your age is. It won't say what your eye color is. It won't say where you live or if you're an organ donor, right? So this type of cryptography is just one type of cryptography. Okay, 2 words of warning because they're the elephants in the room. Cryptography is not free. And networks like Bitcoin that use cryptography to the nth degree with this cryptographic puzzle called mining, they melt the polar ice caps, right? So that's not good. There's an ecological side to cryptography that we have to be mindful of. But there's judicious ways to bring cryptography to the table. While that was true with Bitcoin, circa 2008 when Bitcoin was created, the modern blockchains that are out there are quite ecological. They do not burn a lot of CPU as compared to Bitcoin. So they're much greener. And you can look at some of the new technologies that are coming out from Ethereum, that network, much more energy friendly, as well as some of the permission blockchains like Hyperledger, Fabric, which is completely green, right? So that's one elephant in the room. The other elephant that I hear about, Hilary, is you guys at IBM are working on this quantum computer. We hear rumors that a quantum computer can break modern cryptography. So all of the things that we have been storing for the last decade on computers is now somehow compromisable by a quantum computer. The answer is, unfortunately, yes, that's a concern. You should be concerned with that. That's the bad news. The good news is the National Institute for Science and Technology, working with companies like IBM, have just brought forward a set of algorithms, quantum safe algorithms, that protect your computers, whether you're on a quantum computer or not. You should start thinking about using cryptography, but using quantum safe cryptography. And I think that'll get you through the next 100 years of business. So anyway, that's a little bit about cryptography. It's a big deal.
Excellent. Thank you. I spurs a few more questions from me on how you're thinking about blockchain and the future of it at IBM. But first, you mentioned briefly earlier food safety being related to blockchain. But when we spoke last week, you explained this a little bit more. Can you share with the audience, sort of including food
This
safety?
is,
Maybe there's a few other examples
yeah,
of
Hillary,
unexpected ways blockchain's being used.
yeah, so again, we all think of cryptocurrency and NFTs, and those are all valid uses of this technology. But there's another side of it too that really excites me, and that's kind of, making everyday life better for folks like you and I, and also tackling some of the problems that have been banes of digital existence, or just society and food safety. Foodborne illnesses kill many people every year, and Walmart, we've partnered with a number of food companies, including the likes of Walmart. And, they did an experiment, Hillary, as we were creating this food safety blockchain to track the provenance of food from farm to fork. And they went into a store and they just picked randomly some packaged food, which happened to be a packaged bag of mangoes. And they did, a test to see how long it would take them. Like, let's say if there was some kind of salmonella breakout, how long it would take them to track back to the exact mango farm. And it took them 2 weeks to track back. So then a year or two later, they reran that test, but this time with the food trust blockchain and mining the data on the food trust blockchain for that packaged mangoes. And it took them 2.2 seconds to pinpoint, so from 2 weeks to 2 seconds to be able to pinpoint. So think about, Hillary, what happened before and after. Before blockchain, you have no choice but to eliminate all the mangoes because you don't know where the bad ones are. So, from everyone from the big Walmarts to the mom and pop fruit stands, they all have no choice but if you can pinpoint where, you can say, no, if only if you got your food here that you can eliminate. And I think these are the kinds of things that, can make a very big deal. So that's an example of using blockchain for provenance, tracking origin. And, one of the things Carrefour, which is a big company out in Europe, they have like a scan code on their food products now, where using this food safety network with their mobile app. You scan a piece of food and you can actually see where the food has been. And they do this little thing with dried potatoes. You can actually see like what shelves and how it was imported or exported and where the potato came from, et cetera. So you can actually see the provenance of it. And then think about this beyond food. Like on my podcast, the Think Blockchain podcast, I had Matt from True Tickets, and what they're doing is, ticket um, authenticity. So how do I know where this ticket came from? Is it a counterfeit ticket, et cetera? Same thing with the Gemological Society, et cetera, et cetera. So these kinds of everyday examples, they're not quite cryptocurrency, they're not NFTs, but they're using the same underpinning technology, blockchain, to implement that secured shared ledger where you can actually kind of pinpoint back origins without fear that the data has been accidentally or maliciously tampered with, bringing a platform for trustworthy computing.
Excellent. I love that example of food safety. I think it really brings it home, makes it really, you realize the potential it has to save, as you said, all that food from ending up in a landmine somewhere and people not being able to bring it home and enjoy it. I'm going to pivot to some questions that we have coming in from the audience as we are getting close to 2:30. One question first is, how can small businesses utilize blockchain technology? Is this just for large corporations?
It's not just for large corporations. I mean, there's everything on a very wide scale. I mean, there is explicitly creating digital assets. And if from a small to medium business perspective, look at what Nike and Kellogg's and several companies are doing around NFTs to build their customer loyalty. I mean, I collected baseball cards as a kid, and the NBA and NFL, they got my loyalty through these trading cards. I became part of their ecosystem, and it made me feel part of their club, but also I had something that connected me to it, like a card of my favorite player. So think about, in this new digital world, what are the digital assets that build customer loyalty? We all know loyalty points. The problem with a loyalty point is they work within closed ecosystems. And the nice part about NFTs is that there is a much opener ecosystem. So for example, I love coffee. So whether it's Starbucks or my favorite coffee club down the street, I love to get coffee, and I love to collect loyalty points for coffee. I also travel. I don't love travel as much, air travel, but I do have a lot of airline miles. I wish there was a way to trade my Delta miles for Starbucks points, or even better, points for that mom and pop shop that I love better than Starbucks. But those ecosystems are all closed. But by participating in an open NFT, you can now build loyalty perhaps across ecosystems. So that's one way. Another way is, we're working on this network called Trust Your Supplier. So many small and medium businesses, they want to be suppliers to other businesses. But, I go, to IBM to be a supplier for IBM, and it takes 40 days for IBM to vet me as a supplier. And, they make me fill out a set of forms, and I fill them out, and you have to do it for legal reasons. And then I go to maybe a company like IBM, Cisco, and I go through and guess what? They give me a very similar form. I have to do it all over again. So what happens if companies like IBM and Cisco, et cetera, got together with a blockchain network, respecting your privacy, but knowing that, hey, small company A just validated with the network with two trusted parties. Now, when the third party, you don't need to do it, or you need to do far less. This will cut your cost and cut your time to sign. And we saw a big problem with the pandemic. Supply chains were getting really, hit hard. And it wasn't because there weren't providers out there. There were many small businesses that were able to provide. They just couldn't go through these processes to get onboarded fast enough. And I think, again, there are blockchain networks like Trust Your Supplier that can help put everyone on an equal playing field through trust. It's not that IBM and Cisco don't trust you. It's they can't. There's laws, right? But now with a provable blockchain, you sign on to the network, and members of that network will get your implied trust, right? So I think things like that, Hilary, I do see lots of room for small and medium business. I do think it starts to level the playing field.
Interesting. Makes me think back to when I was applying to colleges and, thinking that the common application was such a great because I could fill it out once, right? Write one essay and send it to multiple universities and not have to fill out
Very
a different
similar.
application for each. That's a great example. I think you mentioned supply chains, and that has been such a huge issue in the US and just all around the globe. Um, so, what do you think the future looks like in sort of combining supply chain with blockchain process and applications? What sort of ways could that help solve some of the crises that we've been facing over the last several months there?
Yeah, I mean, I think blockchain is it has natural ingredients to make it so well suited to things like supply chains. Again, because it's there are so many dimensions. There's the trust. Is this thing authentic, right? So there's the whole counterfeiting and trustworthiness. There's the safety. In transport, did this refrigeration container ever drop past 32 degrees? Has it always been frozen or not? And these are things that will slow food down or goods down at a port. Checking the origins, checking the rules, and all of this. But if we can have this in a trusted ledger, then things could move much faster. That's certainly one aspect of this. I mean, there's other aspects where maybe a blockchain won't eliminate disputes in the supply chain. Like if you buy something from me and I use Kathy to send it to you, a shipping company to send it to you, and then I complain to you, say, hey, you never paid me for the item, and you say to me, I'll be glad to pay you when you send it. And I said, well, I sent it. Oh, there we go. We have a dispute in our supply chain. And IBM study says it takes on average 40 days to resolve that dispute on that across that supply chain, because you have no choice but to do pairwise reconciliation. Like I call you, you call the shipping company, and after a few weeks, we all have our own databases of the truth. And blockchain won't eliminate that dispute. It's going to happen. But what it can do is it can speed up the time that we resolve the dispute, right? So what we saw in an IBM example, that it can speed it up from 40 days to 9 days. And think about it now, in the savings of the 31 days, you have more cash flow going through that, you have more goods flowing through that supply chain, et cetera, right? So whether it's the authenticity, the trustworthiness, or even the dispute resolution and management, I think these are all properties that what the characteristics of the blockchain duck that I went over before, the shared ledger, the immutability, the consensus based, the cryptography, all play into creating this platform for trustworthy computing. And when you trust someone, things just go faster. And commerce is about being able to move quickly to get those opportunities and not waste time on things that matter less to your business. So it's kind of like greasing the skids a bit for the next generation of the web.
Absolutely. And that sounds pretty significant and so much potential in terms of different ways the industries can really leverage the potential of blockchain. But it sounds like we're not quite there yet to realizing that potential. How long do you think it'll take before we get more industries really leveraging blockchain and really maximizing and leveraging its potential?
I think it's within the decade, Hilary. And I think 5 years ago, I said it was in the decade. So I do think
Okay.
this is not a if. This is not an if. This is a when. And I do think one of the things we learned about in kindergarten, let alone in business school, is that sometimes we have trouble playing nice together. And I think blockchain is a team sport. Blockchain means that the Walmarts and the Targets of the world run on the same network. If they're not sharing data, you have blind spots, right? So big company A wants the big company A network, big company C wants the big company C network. But the more we can actually share data across that in a trusted way, the faster it goes. So there's things that are slowing down the adoption of blockchain. But similarly, we see bursts every once in a while, like what's happening with Web3 and some of the things that are happening with NFTs. And yes, there's always other things that slow things down, like Ponzi schemes and some of the not so nice things that are happening in crypto. But when you think about it, that happened in the web, robocalls, and all of these things. When there's a new medium, people find ways to exploit that. But unfortunately, that does slow things down too, Hilary. But I think within the next 5, 7, certainly 10 years, this will be just something we don't talk about anymore, like a database. We don't talk about databases anymore.
Great. Well, I know I've learned a ton. I'm sure the audience has as well. Thanks, Jerry, for joining us today. We have a lot more questions we weren't able to get to, so maybe we can follow up with you to help answer some of our audience's questions in the future.
Sounds good. Thank you, Hilary. And just for those out there, if you're interested in the blockchain, more on the blockchain ducks, more on blockchain use cases, there's the new book that I had put out, Think Blockchain. Royalties from the book are being donated to the American Cancer Society. So it's on Amazon, Think Blockchain.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I love the donation piece. Thanks again, Jerry.
Thank you.
To all of you who tuned in today, again, thank you for being here. Hopefully, Jerry helped explain some of the complicated pieces of blockchain to you. I know he did for me. Our next episode of Tech Forward will be on September 29th on artificial intelligence. So stay tuned. We'll be sending out some information on that agenda shortly. And in the meantime, stay safe, and we will see you in the future.